Hi, everybody. It's nighttime for a change. Kim's holding on to Coco, our Yorkie. We're hoping she doesn't bark during this episode. If she does, we'll just deal with it. Today's a good day, by the way. I finished my latest Christmas script, Let Christmas Eagles Soar. We're going to go into submission on that next week. Keep our fingers crossed. I'll buy an industrial size container of Neosporin for the rug burns on my knees when I'm down praying so much. But like I said, the journey is part of the fun. So we've kind of talked, or I've kind of talked tangentially about a subject in other episodes, spent a little bit of time on it, about bad guys and bad girls that, or women that are out there. And they are out there, okay? So, in fact, they're out there in such profusion that I think it's a good idea that I dedicate an entire episode to this vermin. And I would like to call it Snakes, Sharks, and Weasels, because that's what these people are, okay? They are out in profusion in Los Angeles. They're out in mass numbers in New York, less so in the heartland. Yes, I'm a little bit biased, but it's true, okay? This is a little bit nicer here. There's certainly sharks and weasels and rats here, but not nearly the number that you'll find when you're out in L.A. and New York. And I advised you guys that if you want to get in the business, you got to go out to L.A. So I think it's good to have an episode about these vermin. And the best way, I think, to have the episode is to tell you 3 examples of weasels, snakes, and sharks that I personally dealt with. And I talked this over with Kim. I said, should I name names? And she said, honey, today, she's shaking her head no. She said, today's world, it's so litigious. You know, you just don't even mention names. Just, say a name, a person who will not be named. And I think that's probably the best idea. But I'm going to tell you something, okay? You know by now I'm a spiritual person, okay? I don't lie, okay? I don't tell untruths. So I'm telling you that every single one of these stories that I'm going to tell you right now are absolutely true, okay? I'm not going to name the names, but these are absolutely true. So let me tell you about a weasel, okay? When I first moved out to Los Angeles, I had sold No Place Like Home, $50,000 back in 1976. MGM bought the film rights for it, so I'm very excited about that. I move out to LA, I'm ready to get into the screenwriting business. And as I said, I found out thousands of people were coming to LA every day with the same idea that I had. So I got out there doing extra work and doing whatever I could to survive. And fortunately, with my business background and my parents' men's clothing business, I saw an ad for Entrepreneur Magazine, a business magazine, looking for an editor. So I went over, I did the interview, nailed the interview, and I got hired. And started working there for about a month. And there was a fella in the office next to me. I can name his name because he was a friend of mine. His name was Ron Smith. Really, really nice guy. And I'm sure I mentioned him before. He did the film Clonus, the Parts Horror. And Ron, really affable fella and kind-hearted. And he introduced me to a number of people. And one of the people that he introduced me to, excuse me, was a producer who had done 2 films. Well, let me tell you something. In LA, if you actually get a film produced, it's like you have scaled K2, okay? It is such a monumental job to get it produced. And he got it produced and he got it distributed. So I figured, well, this guy's a legit guy. So I had written my my second novel, which I'm going to reach over here and grab. Thank you, Kim. Called Beyond Forever. And this was an erotic occult story about a doctor and his wife who love each other very much, and he gets killed on a river rafting trip with her. They live in a brownstone in Chicago, and he comes back. He's trying to leap the boundaries back to life. This was long before Ghost was in the motion pictures. That's another story entirely. But I had written it, and I had it. I had it in manuscript form, and I was sending it around. And this producer fella that I became friends with, he said, "Let me read the manuscript." So I said, "Sure, no problem." Gave him the manuscript. He said, "Man, this would make a fabulous movie." He says, "It's got all the right elements." So I said, "That's great." You know, I'm taking everything with a grain of salt, carload of salt. So about 2 weeks later, he says, "Look," he says, it sounds so crazy to say this now. Kim's heard this story 100 times. He says, "I've got these 3 sisters that live in Colombia. And they've got an emerald mine." Kim's shaking her head. But you got to remember, I'm like 26 years old and I'm fresh in the business. And he said, they love the idea. I pitched it to them. They're going to fly in and they're changing some of the emeralds into gold. And they're going to come in and they're going to purchase the film rights to Beyond Forever. So I'm so excited. I can't stand it. I'm so pumped. So 3 days before, you know, I'm talking with him on the phone constantly. 2 days before, the day before, I can't even sleep the night before. They're supposed to come down at LAX. They're supposed to land coming in from Colombia in a private jet and bringing in the gold that they've changed emeralds, you know, exchanged the emeralds and turned them into gold so they can purchase the film rights. And they're supposed to come in at like 10:15, I remember that, 10:15 in the morning on their private jet. Well, 9 o'clock comes, I'm pacing the floor, and 10 o'clock comes, 10:15 comes and goes, 10:30, 11, 12, nothing. So he calls me up at 5 o'clock that afternoon, and he said, "We had a problem." He said, the sisters, it sounds like I'm making this up. He says, the sisters were on final approach to LAX with your gold. They're bringing in the gold to buy the film rights, okay? And as they were on final approach, they got a radio call from Colombia that their brother had a heart attack and they had to go back to Colombia. And I'm visualizing this plane on final approach, and it goes, it flies away. Well, we never heard back from the sisters. I hope their brother recovered. And it turned out to be a BS deal. So that was one of the vermin that I dealt with. So another one was, I got to look it up because it's just so hard to remember some of this stuff. Oh, that's a note about my script. But another one was a fella that, and this is, I swear, this is legitimate stuff. You just can't believe that this could actually happen to anybody. There was an article in LA Magazine about this young, sharp guy that had sold a number of novels. He was an agent, and he got quite a reputation. He was married to a wife who was a producer of big films, okay? And I call him up cold. I love cold calling. We'll talk about that another time. But I call him up cold, and I said, "Look," I said, "sounds like you and I are on the same page." I said, "I've got a novel." It was the same novel, Beyond Forever. It was in typewritten form. I said, "I want to show it to you." He said, "Come on over to my office on Sunset Strip." I go, "Wow, that's great." You know, turned on the charm with him. I go over to his office. Gorgeous offices. He's got an antique bar there that was just spectacular. And we talked for about a half an hour. I give him the manuscript, and he says, "I'll get back to you on it. I'll let you know." Calls me back over the weekend, and he says, "Jack, I read Beyond Forever. I'm in love with this. We want to publish it." He says, "I'm out here in LA for a big publisher. I'm not going to mention the name of it, but it's one of the 5 big ones in New York." And he says, "We're going to buy this for $50,000. and we're going to make it into a film. So I said, that's great. So I called my agent at the time, and I can mention his name. It was
So
Peter.
that was before the film rights with the sisters.
This was after the film rights.
Well, but the book was already published.
The book was not published.
Oh, okay.
It was still in manuscript
Okay.
form. So I'm trying to get the book published.
Okay.
So I called up my agent, which was Peter Ginsberg. I can use his name because he's an iconic, legendary agent. He works with Curtis Brown in San Francisco now, and he's just one of the amazing agents in the whole world. He was my agent for a number of years. I drove him crazy because I was a lunatic when I was in my 20s and 30s. But I said, Peter, I said, this guy, and I mentioned the name, I said, he's working for this publisher in New York. He read Beyond Forever, he read it in manuscript form, and he's offering me $50,000. And I've got him on the phone at the time Peter was in New York. And Peter says, Jack, he says, this doesn't happen in the publishing industry. It's not how it works. I said, you call him up. So he knew, of course, one of these top 5 publishers. He knew the head of the publishing house. So he says, I'll get back to you. He gets off the phone, calls me back in an hour, and he says, I talked to the president of the publishing firm. It's a real deal. They really want to do your book. I said, that's fantastic. So this guy in LA, he gives me really good notes, by the way. Okay, he gives me about 20 pages worth of notes. I spend like a couple of weeks on making the changes. I rewrite the book, not hugely, but a major amount of work. And I start calling him around Thanksgiving to get an update, and I can't get through to him. And I call and I call and I call. And it's a week before Christmas. And I start calling him every day. And finally, his secretary says, you can't get in touch with him because he's in Puerto Rico for the holiday. I said, give me the name of the hotel. She shuddered on the other end. So she gives me the name of the hotel. I called him up. I said, I get him on the phone. I said, you know what? What happened? He says, well, I pitched 3 or 4 producers. They weren't crazy about the idea. He says, I can't sell it as a motion picture, so we're not going to publish it as a book. I said, wait a minute. You told me you were going to publish it. You told me you were going to give me $50,000 for it. If you can't sell it to a studio, that's your problem. But I made your changes. If you want to pull out of the deal, that's up to you. But you owe me $25,000 for half of the advance. He said, well, I can't get them to pay it. I said, you know what? Then you got to pay it out of your own pocket. And this, you got to remember, this is like 25, I was 25 years old. I was a different person. I mean, I'm from Chicago, okay? All these fingers are broken. And I said to him verbatim, I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I want $25,000 from you. You better FedEx it to me. And if I don't get it by tomorrow, when you get back to your office on Sunset Strip, I'm going to come over there with a baseball bat. And I hung up the phone. And the next morning, there was a check that was overnighted to me from Puerto Rico for $25,000. Sad end to the story is I broke out in hives on Christmas Eve because I was so upset. I told everybody in the world that I was going to sell this. And of course, it ended up not getting sold. So that's vermin, okay? That's a rat. It's not a weasel. That's a rat because he's leveraging me to get to somebody else. And he thought he was going to be able to sell it to a producer. Well, he didn't. Sorry, baby, you got to cough up the money. You made a commitment, you got to cough up the money. It's another story I have, but we'll save it for another time because Kim's giving me the high five. But I'm going to dip into Jack's cookie jar of tips, and I'm going to give you one today, okay? We're talking about vermin. We're talking about snakes, we're talking about weasels, and we're talking about sharks. The waters and the grounds are filled with them, okay? And sometimes they'll tip their hand. I had a guy in LA when I got there shortly. I was in a meeting with him, and he said, kid, I like where your head's at. Well, man, if you ever hear that, you should have more red flags popping up than there are in the Kremlin, okay? But a lot of times it's something more subtle. Now, if either of those first stories happened to me today, I would be attacking it in an entirely different way. I would do my homework, I'd do my research, I wouldn't get excited about it, I wouldn't run off at the mouth about how I'm going to sell the film rights. But here's what you need to do. Not all vermin will show their true colors. But you know, Kim and I have taught our children that we are all born with a certain inner voice. And if you're watching this episode, you have that voice because you're a different kind of person. You're a creative person, okay? You may not be published yet, but you will someday, and you will get that screenplay or that novel published, and you will end up directing. You've got a little creative thing inside of you. And part of what you have is also a voice that tells you, hey, Jack, Kim, David, Douglas, Rachel, something's not right here. You've heard that voice before. And when you don't listen to it, that's when you walk into the landmine. So Jack's cookie jar tip today is when you hear that inner voice, run from whatever you're involved with, step back, take some deep breaths, do a deep analysis of what you're involved with objectively, and watch out. Watch out for the vermin. Watch out for the snakes. Watch out for the weasels. And watch out for the sharks. And when you encounter them, get out of town. I wish you good luck. See you guys soon.